Since the massacre of 10/7, when Hamas invaded Israel, slaughtered 1,200, wounded 5,000, and kidnapped 250 people, one podcast has emerged as indispensable. That is Dan Senor's Call Me Back podcast. Now, Dan has expanded the offerings at ARC Media, and he's also made it available to become a Call Me Back Insider, which I've done. I've now subscribed to Call Me Back Insider because I like Nadav Eyal and Amit Segal and all these people. Dan Senor joins me now. Good afternoon, Dan. Congratulations on the expansion.
Hey, Hugh. Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I am great. I'm glad, especially on a day with bad news coming out of Israel, because you talked with Amit Segal today about the fact that Israel appears to be losing the war, the media narrative war, at least in the international left. What would you recommend that the Prime Minister do after the hit on the Nasser hospital today?
Well, I think it's important that he basically issued a statement taking responsibility and saying that the IDF issued a statement saying that they were doing a full investigation. Assuming what we know about it so far is what actually happened, it was clearly an accident. No one was targeting journalists. Nobody was targeting medical workers. The reality is, Hugh, as you know and as you've covered extensively since October 7th, Gaza is the most population-dense territory in the world, certainly the most population-dense battlefield that we know of, war theater that we've known of in modern history. And Israel's fighting an enemy that, as its strategy, co-locates its fighting forces in civilian areas, in medical facilities, in hospitals, in mosques, in schools, in UN facilities, and it uses its civilian population to protect the terrorists and the war fighters rather than the other way around. And so, tragically, an accident like today, if that was in fact the case, can happen. It's a rarity. It's extraordinary, by the way, that these sorts of things are the rarities that they are. It speaks to the great lengths the IDF goes to avoid these kinds of mistakes. I think they not only are held to a higher standard than almost any other military in the world, but they hold themselves to a higher standard than any other military in the world. And yet, even with the great lengths that the IDF goes to, by the way, a great risk to their own lives, these sorts of things happen. And I think the Prime Minister simply has to explain that. And I think he has started to. And I think his friends and allies around the world, including in Washington, like the Trump administration, should back him up in making it clear that this is a tragic war that could end tomorrow if Hamas chooses to end it. And until then, the ugliness of war and the errors in war will continue to occur.
Now, Dan, I always point out when something like this happens, the United States bombed the Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the NATO operation against Yugoslavia in 1999. Bad things happen in war because things go amiss. However, this is only the second that I can think about. There was the aid worker convoy. That was a mistake for which Israel paid a heavy price in the international media. Can you think of any other major strike that was in error?
No, not of this scale. There have been many, incidents of human catastrophe that Israel has been held responsible for, even though it wasn't responsible for, has been blamed for.
Oh, they shot their own hostages.
Right,
yeah.
And the hospital, in the Shifa hospital, I think it was, in the early part of the war, like a month, and this was still in 2023, when the Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, misfired a rocket that ended up landing on the area adjacent to the hospital, and immediately everyone, including the New York Times, blamed Israel for it. So there have been these incidents that Israel has been blamed, or at least initially been blamed. But I don't, other than the ones that Israel were ultimately responsible for, which it sounds like it was in this case, we can count them on one hand. Again, it's unbelievable to me. I mean, just think about this. This October will be 2 years, and Israel's fighting on multiple fronts, and its military is overstretched, and it is, as I said, it's fighting against the most diabolical enemy one could possibly imagine, and it's a miracle that I'm not letting anyone off the hook. I'm not absolving anyone of responsibility here. I'm simply saying it is a miracle that more incidents like this have not happened. There was a camera, from what I understand, according to reports, pointing at an Israeli tank, and they were concerned that the camera was being used to track the movements of the IDF for purposes of obviously targeting it. That's not a crazy assumption. I'm sure we'll learn more about that, and that's partly what resulted in them firing at this facility.
Now, what I want to talk about was Amit Segal today made the argument that is close to my heart, which is I don't think Israel should believe that the world is turning against it. I just saw the polling in America where the numbers are still 3 out of 4 people support Israel strongly. I believe the international left has just thrown off the cloak that they try to hide between being even-handed. And every time an Israeli politician says that, or an Israeli activist, I think it's an admission against interest. And Amit made that point, that the Israeli opposition make these statements. They appear not to know how they are amplified by the international left. Do you think they're ever going to figure that out?
It's really crazy. I mean, I try to make the case for Israel and the importance of this alliance that the United States has with Israel. Often on American television, when I do, I'm often quoted by anchors who are critical of Israel, who cite Israelis, who who articulate the same criticisms that I'm being presented with to respond to. And look, my response to you, Hugh, is on the one hand, it's maddening when Yair Golan, who's a former deputy chief of staff of the IDF, who's currently the leader of the Democrats Party in Israel, which is the far left party in Israel, he's been on my podcast, smart guy, but he said about a month or two ago that Israel, the IDF, is killing children, making a habit or a hobby or something of killing children. Now, if he's in a future government, which is entirely possible, he could be serving in a government that's a successor to the Netanyahu-led government. He doesn't think the ICC or these other international bodies are not going to use his own words against him and say, so you said it's not just the prime minister. It's not just Defense Minister Gallant at the ICC, but they'll say you said Israeli soldiers were making a hobby or a habit, forget the exact word, of killing Palestinian babies. So, how do you have an official in the Israeli government saying that? Now, I understand he's in opposition and political figures in opposition say incendiary things for a domestic audience, but they do not take great care to think about how this will be interpreted internationally. And this is the tension of Israel. On the one hand, they want to be a normal country. In my Inside Call Me Back, you mentioned the subscriber service for Inside Call Me Back, the insider feed. Nadav Ayel, in a recent episode of that conversation we had, he said, Israel wants to be treated like a normal country. And normal countries have thriving, noisy, contentious democracies. And opposition figures in noisy, contentious democracies say incendiary things against the government. That's what they do. One could argue that's their job. So on the one hand, Israel wants to be a normal democracy. On the other hand, tragically, Israel is held to this ridiculous standard internationally. So it's a lose-lose situation. You can't.
It's maddening. Now, Dan, I told you one segment, but if you can stay two, I want to continue the conversation about Amit. We're going to take a 4-minute break, and I'll be back if Dan can stay. If you're interested in Israel, it's Call Me Back. There's also a Call Me Back Insider feature now, which I have subscribed to. I can't recommend highly enough. Dan, 2 things in 6 minutes. First, the president's Oval Office comments today that he thinks Gaza will be over in 2 weeks. I was mystified by that. And then Amit Segal, your guest today, saying Israel understands it gets hammered in the international press, but in the end, it always comes back, and we're in higher esteem when we win. You pick your order you want to cover those 2 things, and aware that we got 5 minutes or so.
I'll be trying to be succinct. On the second point, I, as you know from that episode, I tried to challenge Amit a little bit on what feels to me like the walls are closing in internationally against Israel right now. So I think they have to be a little more strategic and proactive in their communications internationally. That said, I've said since October 7th that if you look at the diplomacy that was happening around Israel, the normalizing of relations of Israel in the Arab world, specifically in the Sunni Gulf, before October 7th, this normalization was not happening because Israel was perceived as weak and vulnerable. It was happening because Israel was viewed as a military and intelligence juggernaut and an economic superpower in the region and a technology superpower in the world. Strength, Hugh, one word, strength. Israel was perceived as a source of strength, and the Arab world, most of the Arab world, wanted to piggyback onto that strength for their own interests. And if Israel comes out of this war, however messy and long it is, looking like it persevered against a multi-front war, and it's still standing, and Hamas can't crawl out of the rubble after October 7th and say they're still here, Israel, according to this point of view, Israel will regain its geopolitical position in the world. I think it already has, based on its success with the Pager attack against Hezbollah, against the extraordinary joint Israeli-U.S. operation against Iran. So I do think that time will pass, and there'll be plenty of time for Israel to do repair. And if diplomatic repair, and if it looks like it's in a strong position, countries around the world will still want to do business and partner with Israel. As it relates to President Trump, I think what President Trump is seeing and hearing is the intelligence on what Israel plans to do in Gaza City. It is the last stronghold for Hamas. I spoke to an American official in Israel the other day, whose name I won't say, who said, if Israel does not go into Gaza City, Hamas will be able to regain its position, and Israel has to learn to live with the reality that there'll be a future, some form of a future October 7th. And so that is, I think that's what the president is referring to, is that Israel seems pretty, or at least the prime minister and the leadership feels pretty focused on going into Gaza City with all its risks, and there are plenty, more than we have time to get into today, but that if they actually do not go into Gaza City, Hamas could conceivably live to fight another day. And I think the president is saying, because Israel's going in, the likelihood of Hamas living to fight another day goes way down.
I hope that's what he meant. I hope that's what he meant. Very last comment. I continually write down, the world has 4 superpowers now: America and China, Russia, and Israel. That means a nuclear power capable of projecting forth with the will and the intelligence capacity to do so strategically with tactical success. Do you agree with my assessment? When it comes down to it, there are really only 4.
Yeah, and I would say that the U.S. Israel gives the U.S. extraordinary leverage in the Middle East, and one of the most strategically important parts of the world for the United States. As Ron Dermer quoted Al Haig on my podcast, Al Haig said several decades ago that Israel is like a battleship, an aircraft carrier in the heart of a region that means a lot to the United States. Haig said an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the heart of a region that matters a lot to the United States. And I think that unsinkability gives it its superpower status, its force projection in the region gives it its superpower status, and it's an extraordinary asset to the United States, the most important superpower in the world, for that region. It gives the U.S. leverage in the Middle East. It means that the U.S. has to do less, not more, in the Middle East because Israel is there.
I couldn't agree more, and that's why, again, recommend to everyone who's listening or watching on the Salem News Channel, go and listen to Call Me Back. You can get, for free, a lot of good Call Me Back, but you ought to become an insider at Call Me Back and get it all. Dan, Senor, always good to talk to you. Thank you for joining me, my friend.